I kissed him at my own engagement party. And the worst part? I knew exactly who he was. Let me back up. His name was Lachlan Voss. And no, before you say anything, he wasn't my fiancé. My fiancé was Bennett Voss. Bennett, who'd spent 3 years being the most patient, most steady, most genuinely decent man I'd ever let myself love. Bennett, who brought me Tim Hortons every Sunday morning without me asking, who remembered that I hated overhead lighting, who proposed on a Tuesday in our kitchen, because he said he didn't want to wait for a special moment anymore. He said every moment with me already was one. I said yes without hesitating. And then his older brother walked into our engagement party, and something in me went very, very quiet. I'm Lydia Marsh. I'm 31 years old. I'm a nurse practitioner at a hospital in Halifax, and I am not the kind of woman who does things like this. I pay my taxes early. I keep my commitments. I remember everyone's birthday. I have never, not once in my life, been described as impulsive, which is maybe why what happened at the Voss family estate that September felt less like a choice I made and more like something that made me. I still don't fully know how to explain it. I've tried, to myself mostly, in those 3 a.m. hours when the ceiling of whatever room I'm sleeping in stops feeling familiar. I've tried to make the math work in a way that doesn't make me the villain of my own story. Some days I almost manage it, but I should probably just tell you what happened. Bennett's family was old Halifax money, the kind that doesn't announce itself but sits quietly in the foundations of buildings you walk past every day without knowing. His father, Gerard Voss, had built a property development company over 40 years that now touched most of the waterfront. His mother, Frances, chaired 2 charitable boards and had opinions about everything, delivered in a voice that never rose above a certain measured warmth that somehow made disagreement feel rude. I'd met them a handful of times before the engagement. Dinners. A cottage weekend in the Annapolis Valley. They were polite to me in the way that people are polite when they're still deciding what to think of you. Frances asked about my nursing career with genuine curiosity, but occasionally used a tone that suggested she found it interesting in the way one finds a documentary about a foreign country interesting. I didn't love the dynamic, but I loved Bennett, and I thought, I genuinely believed, that given enough time, I would find my footing with his family. What I hadn't counted on was Lachlan. He lived in Vancouver. He ran some kind of private equity firm. The details were always vague when Bennett talked about him, which in retrospect I should have clocked. He was 4 years older than Bennett, unmarried, and had apparently spent the last 7 years being the family's necessary complication. The one everyone referenced but no one quite explained. The one whose name changed the temperature of a room. You'll meet him at the party, Bennett told me 2 weeks before. He's flying in. What's he like? I asked. Bennett thought about it longer than I expected. He's a lot, he finally said. But he's family. That wasn't an answer. I didn't press. The party was held at the Voss house on the Northwest Arm. A restored Victorian that Frances had spent years perfecting. The kind of house that looked like something out of a magazine and felt, when you were actually inside it, slightly too beautiful to fully relax in. There were caterers. There was a string quartet for the first hour. There were approximately 40 people I mostly didn't know drinking wine and congratulating me in that warm, slightly performative way that engagement parties seem to require. I was happy. Genuinely. Bennett looked incredible in a dark blazer and kept finding me across the room with his eyes, giving me this quiet smile that I'd loved for 3 years. My best friend Orla was there, already halfway through her second glass of Riesling, already making friends with Bennett's cousin. My parents had driven up from Dartmouth. For about the first 2 hours, everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. And then the front door opened and the energy in the room shifted. I felt it before I saw him. That sounds dramatic, and maybe it is, but it's the honest truth. There was this subtle adjustment in the people near the entrance, like a current moving through water. Voices didn't stop, but they changed register. Frances straightened almost imperceptibly. Gerard turned. Lachlan Voss walked in wearing a charcoal jacket over a black shirt, and he was so obviously Bennett's brother that it almost made me laugh. Same height, same dark hair, same line of the jaw, and also somehow so completely different that the similarity felt almost like a trick. Where Bennett moved through a room like someone who belonged in it and knew it, Lachlan moved like someone who knew exactly what a room was and had decided to tolerate it. He scanned the space, His eyes landed on me. "You must be Lydia," he said when he reached me. "Not a question. And you must be the brother who couldn't be bothered to RSVP," I said. I don't know where that came from. I'm not usually that direct with strangers. But something about the way he was looking at me, assessing, like I was a contract he was reviewing, made me want to meet it. His mouth curved, just slightly. "Bennett warned me about you. Hopefully not too much. Enough," he said. And then Bennett appeared at my elbow, with a glass of sparkling water for me, and Lachlan's expression shifted into something more brotherly, more ordinary. And the three of us stood there, talking for a few minutes about his flight and the house, and some renovation project the family had in Lunenburg, and everything was completely normal. It was fine. He was fine. I told myself that. I told myself that for the next 2 hours. The thing about Lachlan was that he didn't pursue me. That's what made it so hard to categorize afterward. He didn't corner me, didn't engineer moments, didn't do any of the things that would have made the story simpler. He was just present. In the way that certain people are present in a room, even when they're on the other side of it. I found myself aware of where he was. That's all. I noticed when he moved, who he was talking to, when he laughed. I noticed that he laughed less than Bennett, but that when he did it reached his eyes. I noticed that he spent 20 minutes talking to my father, about something that made my father, who is a reserved man, genuinely animated. I noticed that he refilled Francis's wine without being asked, and didn't make a thing of it. I told myself I was just curious about him. He was my fiancé's brother. Of course I was paying attention. Around 9 o'clock, most of the guests had moved to the back garden, where the caterers had set up a dessert table, and someone had strung lights between the trees. I stepped away from a conversation about Bennett's cousin's renovation project to get some air. There's a side porch off the library that Francis had told me about, a quiet spot overlooking the water. Lachlan was already there. "Sorry," I said, starting to back away. "I didn't know anyone was out here." "It's your party," he said. "I'll go." "No, I stopped. "It's fine, stay." We stood there for a moment in that slightly awkward silence of two people who are not quite strangers and not quite something else. "How are you doing?" he asked. "Actually." "What do you mean, actually?" "Engagement parties are a lot of being on," he said. "I wondered if you were tired." It was such a specific, accurate observation that it caught me off guard. I was tired. I'd been performing happiness for 3 hours. Genuine happiness, but performed nonetheless, and no one else that night had thought to ask. "I'm okay," I said. "You don't have to be." I looked at him. "Do you always say things like that to people you just met?" "Only when I think they need to hear it." There was something in the way he said it, not flirtatious, not calculated, just direct, that made something in my chest go sideways. I looked away at the water. The lights from Purcell's Cove reflected across the surface in long gold ribbons. "Bennett talks about you," I said. "Not a lot, but what does he say?" "That you're a lot," I said. "And that your family." Lachlan was quiet for a moment. "That sounds about right. What happened between you two?" He looked at me then, and I thought he was going to deflect. Instead, he said, "A lot of things over a lot of years. Nothing that's your problem to carry." "It might be," I said, "if I'm marrying into it." "Fair," he said, and something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but opened, like a door cracking. "We want different things from this family. We always have. Bennett wants to preserve it. I want to." He stopped. "It doesn't matter what I want. It clearly does." He looked at me for a long moment, and I genuinely don't know, what I was thinking. The lights were in the water. It was a warm night for September. Somewhere in the garden, someone was laughing at something, and the sound came through the trees like music. I leaned in and I kissed him. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. Less. And then I pulled back and I saw his face. Not triumphant, not smug, just very still. And I heard Bennett's voice from inside the house saying my name. I went cold. I've thought about that moment more times than I can count. I've tried to understand what I was doing. Was I self-sabotaging? Was I testing something? Was I just, in some fundamental way, not ready for what Bennett was offering me, and this was the most destructive possible way my subconscious chose to surface that? Maybe all three. Maybe none. What I know is that I stepped back through that door, and Bennett was standing in the library looking for me, and his face when he found me was so open and so glad that I felt physically sick. "There you are," he said. "Orla's looking for you. She wants to do the toast." Okay, I said. Give me 2 minutes. He kissed me on the cheek and went back to the garden. I stood in the library alone and pressed my hands flat against the bookcase and tried to breathe. Lachlan came in from the porch. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Careful, measured, something underneath that I didn't have access to. That can't happen again, I said. I know, he said. I love Bennett. I know that too. Then why didn't you stop me? He was quiet for a long moment. Because, he said finally, you didn't look like you wanted to be stopped. I got through the toast. I smiled at the right times and squeezed Bennett's hand and said something about how he made me feel like the luckiest person in the room, and every word of it was true. Orla cried a little. My mom cried more. Gerard Voss looked like he was carefully not showing any particular emotion, which I was starting to understand was his baseline. Lachlan stood at the back of the gathering and raised his glass with everyone else, and did not look at me once. By 11, the party was winding down. By midnight, the caterers were packing up. Bennett and I helped Frances with the last of the glasses, and she patted my arm and said I was wonderful, and I said thank you, and I went home with my fiancé and lay awake next to him until 4 a.m, staring at the ceiling. I didn't tell him, not that night. I kept thinking I would find the right moment. I kept thinking I would understand what I'd done before I tried to explain it. I kept thinking about what Lachlan had said. You didn't look like you wanted to be stopped, and hating how accurate it felt, and hating myself for feeling the strange, complicated pull of something I couldn't name. Lachlan flew back to Vancouver 3 days later. I went back to work. I pulled 12-hour shifts. I went with Bennett to look at venues for the wedding. I had dinner with his parents and was warm and present and everything I was supposed to be. I was also, underneath all of it, a person who had kissed her fiancé's older brother at their engagement party and couldn't stop thinking about it. 6 weeks later, Lachlan called me. I don't know how he got my number. I assume Bennett gave it to him at some point for practical reasons. I stared at his name on my screen for 4 full rings before I answered. Why are you calling me? I said, instead of hello. Because I need to say something to you in person, and I can't do that from Vancouver. My heart did something complicated. What does that mean? I'm coming back to Halifax next week. Work thing. Can we meet? Lachlan. I'm not asking you to do anything, he said. I just need to say something. And then you can decide what to do with it. I should have said no. I know that. I said, tell me what day. We met at a coffee shop on Barrington Street on a Thursday afternoon, which felt deliberately unglamorous in a way I appreciated. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with an Americano and looking at something on his phone, and when he looked up at me, the look on his face was so straightforward, not calculated, not constructed, that I felt the back of my throat go tight. You look tired, he said. I haven't been sleeping great because of… Yes, I said. He nodded. He wrapped both hands around his cup. I want to say something and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Okay. I have never, not once, in all the years I've been watching Bennett date people, felt the way I felt that night. On that porch, he paused. And I don't know what to do with that because he's my brother, and you're his fiancé, and I'm not a person who does this. I need you to know that. I was very still. But I also need you to know, he continued, that if any part of what you felt that night was real, I mean really real, not just a moment, not just the wine and the lights, then I think you need to be honest with yourself about it before you walk down an aisle. Not for my sake, for his. The coffee shop was loud around us. Someone's kid was running between the tables. A barista called out a name that wasn't mine. That's a lot to ask of someone, I said. I know, you're asking me to blow up my life on the basis of a 2-second kiss. I'm asking you to be honest, he said. What you do with that is yours. I didn't blow up my life that day. I went back to the hospital and finished my shift and came home and made pasta and watched something on TV with Bennett and felt, every single second of it, like the world's most convincing fraud. But I couldn't stop hearing it. Be honest with yourself. Because the honest answer, the one I'd been pressing down under 6 weeks of long shifts and venue appointments and carefully not thinking about it, was that I had not kissed Lachlan Voss because I was confused or tired or overwhelmed. I had kissed him because, for the first time in a very long time, I had felt completely, terrifyingly known by someone I'd just met. And that feeling scared me so much more than anything else. I loved Bennett. I want to be clear about that, because it matters, because he deserves that truth. I loved him the way you love something that has been steady and good and genuinely yours for 3 years. But love, I was learning, is not a single thing. And what I felt on that porch, that terrifying clarity, that sense of being seen down to the marrow, was not something I could unknow. I told Bennett on a Sunday, in our kitchen, in the morning. He deserved to know in a place that felt like ours, not some neutral ground I'd chosen for my own comfort. I told him everything. I told him about the porch. I told him about Lachlan calling. I told him about the coffee shop. I didn't soften any of it. I thought he deserved the unsmoothed version. He was quiet for a very long time. "Did you sleep with him?" he asked. His voice was completely even, which was somehow worse than if it had broken. "No," I said. "Absolutely not." He nodded. He looked at the table. "Bennett, I need you to leave," he said. "Right now. I need you to go." I went. I spent 4 days at Orla's apartment. She didn't ask me to justify myself, and she didn't tell me I'd made the right choice, and she didn't make me feel better about it, because there wasn't a way to feel better about it. She just kept my glass full and let me sit in her window and look at the street, and fall apart quietly in the way that I needed to. My phone was very quiet. Bennett didn't call. Lachlan didn't call either, which I'd half expected and half dreaded. On the 5th day, Bennett texted me. Just, "Can you come get your things Saturday?" I said yes. I went on Saturday. He wasn't there. He'd gone to his parents' place, I assumed, or maybe a friend's. The apartment felt like a museum of the life we'd been building. I packed slowly. I cried twice. I took the photograph from our first trip to PEI off the shelf and sat with it for a while and then put it in the box. 3 months passed. I moved into a rental in the North End. I threw myself back into work. I went for long walks along the waterfront in the evenings when the shift was done, the kind of walks where you're not really thinking about anything but your body needs to move. I had dinner with my parents. I talked to Orla. Lachlan and I texted occasionally, not romantically, just checking in, the way you do with someone whose life has now intersected with yours in an irreversible way. He was careful with me. I appreciated that. In December, he came back to Halifax for the holidays. He texted to ask if I wanted to get dinner. I took a very long time to respond. Then I said yes. We went to a small Italian place on Quinpool Road. Nothing fancy, checkered tablecloths, wine list written on a chalkboard. We talked for 3 hours. About his work, about my patients, about the family, carefully, in the way you have to when a family is both the source of a wound and still a fact of someone's life. He told me about growing up as the complicated brother, the one who wanted to do things differently, and never quite had the right language for how different he needed to be. I told him about growing up as the responsible one, the one who made choices that felt safe, and then woke up one day and wondered what she'd been so afraid of. "I'm still afraid," I told him. "I just think I'm more afraid of the alternative now." Which is getting to the end of things and wondering what would have happened if I'd been honest. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "For what it's worth," he said. "I have never once not known exactly who you were. From the moment you gave me grief about the RSVP, I laughed, genuinely. It came out of me like something loosening. That's either a very good sign," I said, "or a very alarming one, probably both," he said. "I want to be honest about the cost of everything, because I think stories like this sometimes skip over that part in a way that isn't fair." Bennett was hurt. Deeply, genuinely hurt in a way that he didn't deserve. He had done everything right. He had been steady and kind and present in all the ways that matter. And he still got handed a loss that wasn't his fault. I carry that. I think I'll always carry some of it. He deserved better than the way I found out what I needed to find out, even if I couldn't have found it out any other way. His family was not kind to Lachlan afterward. Francis stopped calling. Gerard made his position clear in the Voss way, quietly, finally, in a way that left no room for debate. 2 of the siblings sided with Bennett, which was understandable. Lachlan handled it with the particular steadiness of someone who had long ago made peace with being the family's difficult thing. But I know it cost him more than he showed. And there were weeks, long, gray Halifax winter weeks, where I sat with what I'd done and couldn't dress it up as anything other than what it was. A betrayal. Even a genuine one. Even one that came from something true. But here is also what's true. Bennett is doing better now. I heard through Orla that he'd started seeing someone in the spring. Someone he'd met through a friend. someone who knew his family already, and fit easily into the shape of his life in all the ways I never quite had. I was glad, I meant it genuinely, and I was not doing worse. Lachlan and I have been together for about 8 months now. We live in separate places, which feels right for where we are. He still spends half his time in Vancouver, and I still do my shifts at the hospital, and we exist in the specific rhythm of two people who came to each other sideways and are still figuring out what that means. It's not easy. I want to be clear about that too. The family tension is real. The complicated history is real. There are dinners I'm not invited to and conversations that go quiet when I enter them. But there are also mornings in his kitchen in the North End, when the light comes through the window in that particular grey-gold Halifax way, and we're just drinking coffee and he's reading something, and I'm watching the street and it feels steady. In a way I didn't know I was missing, like something that finally fits the actual shape of me, not the shape I'd been careful to keep. He still calls me Marsh sometimes when he's teasing. It started as a callback to that first night. You must be Lydia, formal, assessing, and turned into something else entirely. Affection, maybe. Familiarity. The kind of nickname that arrives without planning and stays because it means something. I still think about the porch sometimes. That moment right before and right after. What it cost and what it gave back. I kissed him knowing exactly who he was, and I think in the same moment, I finally knew exactly who I was too. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the kiss itself, but what it was a door to. The version of me that was tired of performing safety, and finally, terrifyingly, did the honest thing instead. I don't recommend the method. I'd change how I did it if I could, but I wouldn't change where I ended up.